This is Hashtag Impact, a podcast about stuff that matters, and I am your host, Regina Larco. Hashtag Impact proudly ranks in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes, and this is because of you. Thank you for listening. This episode is special. It's special because the woman I recorded with, Tanja Wessels, has been one of the earliest and biggest supporters of Hashtag Impact. It's special because we got to record it face to face in a cafe in the city center of Hong Kong. We sat just by the window on comfy lounge chairs, Hong Kong's signature sky rises surrounding us, and the coffee maker grinding beans in the background, creating such a cozy, comfortable setting for our conversation. This episode is special because we go back to that very first live recording we did with Redress founder Christina Dean back in 2017. As this live recording made a massive impact on a lifestyle choice Tanja committed to ever since. This episode is special because you will also get to hear the voice of this year's Hong Kong Prize winner at the Redress Design Awards 2021, Sai Lau. Her design philosophy is to always find beauty in things that are odd and imperfect, and I'm really excited for you to hear her story. This episode is special because you get to hear about Sustainable Development Goal 12, responsible consumption, and why it is such a tricky one globally, but especially for us here in Asia. If you want to become part of the conversation, I invite you to join us for our monthly Hashtag Impact Club virtual coffee break from wherever you are in the world. There we celebrate our action steps as well as our big wins and fails on all things change making. Join us over at hashtagimpact.com/club. Let's begin. Tanja Wessels is fascinated by psychology and why we do what we do. In 2021, she is celebrating 4 years of not buying new clothing, something that started as a 1-year personal challenge, but has since opened up a wealth of unexpected opportunities, hasn't it? And she's smiling and laughing.
It sure has.
She stopped buying new clothes on May 10th, 2017, after listening to a Hashtag Impact podcast recording with the incredible Redress founder, Christina Dean. In her TEDx talk, she calls this moment a wake-up call. I mean, Tanja, there are so many things I would like our listeners to know about you before we even get into the recording. Like the thought-provoking articles you're writing, your breathtaking eco-art performances, being named as one of the 2019 Green is the New Black Green Warriors, being a founding member of Circular Community Hong Kong, a platform to encourage circular thinking, and, you know, your new business venture with Revive Consulting. Yeah, I hope we get to touch upon many of these things, but this is actually a really personal recording, a really personal moment for me, because you've been part of this Hashtag Impact journey for such a long time, being right there in the audience at this very first Hashtag Impact live recording, and it was so life-changing for you. And I want to know all about what happened after that day. Tanja, welcome to Hashtag Impact Podcast. We finally made it happen.
It is so good to be here. We did finally make it, and it's fantastic.
So let's go back to that day of the recording. How was it for you that day to learn about the impacts of the fashion industry on our world, and what did you do with that information?
It was quite alarming to realize that our everyday habits or actions have really, really big consequences, and that was a little bit disconcerting, and it was alarming. But it was also exciting and empowering, because you realize that, well, I actually have skin in this game. I'm part of it, and I can also change that trajectory to some extent. And I think the magic of Christina Dean is that she has this wonderful combination of really elegant, intelligent, and chic-looking person, but at the same time very down-to-earth, very open, and very warm. And when I listened to her speak on your podcast, I understood. It almost felt like she was giving people permission to not play that fashion game. She shared her experience about going dumpster diving, and I'll never forget where she spent a year just wearing clothes out of the dumpsters.
In different countries you have landfills that you can walk up, people are living on them. Anyway, the point about the Hong Kong one was that it's very organised, but it was equally shocking to see just how much crap we throw away every single day. And I thought to myself, therefore, I'm going to just dress myself in other people's discarded clothes. So for a year, my 365 challenge, I just wore people's discarded clothes. We have enormous amounts of clothing waste out there.
And I thought, wow, in a city like Hong Kong that is so elegant and chic, and brands and hygiene and everything's sanitized, I thought this was a really brave admission by somebody to say that, hey, sometimes I don't even wash the clothes, I give it the sniff test. And that was like, what? That's fantastic.
I worked with recycling centres in Hong Kong, and I got my clothes out of a bin, not this landfill, of a recycling bin, for a whole year with a different outfit every day. And so basically I wore people's trash for a year, and
I looked gorgeous and fabulous at the
I
same
looked
time.
better than my old clothes, actually. It was a bit sad. So actually this was one of my favourites out of the bin. And I guess it just taught me that we need to be thinking differently about waste. And one of my favourite things about, you see, when you do these crazy things, like whatever it is that you might be interested in. Oh, another quick one is, I cycled to Vietnam because I wanted to see it with my own eyes. And it's only like, you've got to go out there and have a look at it, and to really see it. And that was another experience, like it's got to get you in the heart and get you sort of a visceral reaction to these things. And so therefore, the quote that I love, which I've used before, which is, waste is not waste until it is wasted. And that's what we need to be doing, whether you're talking about food, fuel, fashion, fibres, trims, buttons, jewellery, whatever you want. It's not waste. Sarah, with the waste that drove you at Lane Crawford, or the fashion waste rather, perhaps not specifically just retail waste, it's not waste. You've got buyers. Yeah. So that's what I think is important. These crazy experiences, they translate into sense, and then you can actually talk about it.
So I thought, okay, if Christina can do it, I'm going to give it a go. So I told myself on the 10th of May 2017, for 1 year, let's see what would happen if I didn't buy any new clothing. And I posted about it on social media, and the responses were quite eye-opening. Some people were like, that's not a big deal. And these were people in the US. People in Hong Kong were more like, are you sure? That sounds really scary. Are you okay? And so you could tell the different responses from where people were. Some people didn't bat a lid. Other people were completely concerned about my well-being. And then some people were a bit cheeky, I guess. They were asking, but what are you going to do about your underwear? And it hadn't really crossed my mind at that time, but there I was out there for the public to discuss my underwear. But you put yourself out there, and you're going to have to roll with what comes. But it was the beginning of something that I'm still doing today.
I have to smile because I'm just, this hearing you share about how you experienced Christina, and I recommend everyone who hasn't discovered the work of Redress yet, and also what they're doing at the social impact business, the R Collective, born out of their NGO work with Redress, then definitely check out episode, I want to say 14, now I'm not even sure which one was it, with Christina Dean. Scroll all the way back. I'm going to put a link in the show notes as well to make it easy for you to find. Because I think Christina has this impact on a lot of people. And it is what it showed me, and why I'm really happy to have her as my very first guest at a live recording, is the power of communicating your story and your passion and the impact you want to make. Because in the end, if you're just one person, yes, your actions matter and every little action matters. But if you have the gift and the courage to try to bring other people with you on that journey, I mean, look at the impact you can make then. And I think this is something that I find oftentimes when I'm speaking to very humble change makers, that I call you one of those as well. You know, you, by putting yourself out there with that message and then with all the other things that followed as well, you are also making a huge difference with your actions. And I actually want to bring up Paul. Paul.
The ball, the plastic ball.
I want to bring up Paul the plastic ball. Tell me about Paul.
Paul. So Paul was born out of the Green is the New Black event in Hong Kong, which was 2018.
Yes.
Thank you. I was kindly invited by the organizers to not only give a talk, but also to create some art. And I thought that one thing that was really getting my attention was this cling film that we see being used in very discreet ways. So cling film at that time and at this time wasn't quite the headline of the plastics conversation. Everybody was all about the straws and single-use cups, and quite rightly, and plastic bags. That was like the crowd pleasers. But quietly in the background, cling film was wrapping sofas, it was in supermarket crates, it was everywhere, and large volumes of it, and nobody was talking about how you recycle it or what happens to it. It was just a given. And I thought it was time for its stage center moment, and so I decided to create a large cling film ball, which involved me making buddies with the people in my local supermarket and going on regular journeys there to go and collect cling film that was being discarded from deliveries. They were very confused initially. My Cantonese is not that good, so there was a lot of sign language and kind of like performance going around this exchange. Over time they got very used to me, and they would keep the cling film in the bag for me, and I would come home with bags and bags and bags of cling film, and I would just roll it into a little ball, and I would keep on adding layers, much like a dung beetle rolling dung. I was rolling cling film in half my apartment was covered in it, and my husband very gratefully was like, yeah, sure, do what you need to do. So there we were living with our cling film, and I made this 13-kilo ball, and I dragged it around Hong Kong with me. Because I needed to get it to locations. But then I started realizing people's reactions were really entertaining. So I would just take them for walks. And people's reactions were part of the performance. And I would hold them over my head, and I would drag them up streets. Hong Kong has many steep roads, and I would pull them up, and I would roll them down. And it just became part of the experience. So Paul the Plastic Ball was probably my first kind of public experience of collecting waste in Hong Kong and just making it a showcase.
What happened to Paul?
So Paul had many iterations, and he was quite heavy, and then he got rained on and he got wet, a whole bunch of palavas. But then he was invited to be part of a UN public art piece in Hong Kong by Keisha Hanman, and she wanted to, so I took him to a university because I couldn't keep him at home, he was too big. So one of the universities kindly gave me a space, so I dragged him to this university, and then he was held in one of the rooms for months until he was ready for the UN art piece. He had many iterations, and he inspired a few other performances, and eventually he came to his recycled end. It was a moment of gratitude, but he also needed to go because he was really heavy. Really heavy animal.
When we're looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG12, responsible consumption, is one that is a tricky one for Asia in particular. And you've lived in Asia for many years now. I know you were for a long time in Cambodia as well. You made Asia your home. And now, especially with the challenge you gave yourself, that really has become a lifestyle of not buying any new clothes anymore. Especially when it comes to second-hand fashion, this is something that is a topic that's not easy to promote here in Asia. What kind of conversations have you had around this topic that were maybe the most eye-opening as you went into this journey?
I think the consumption question is pretty global, and for a long time a lot of that consumption wasn't necessarily coming from Asia, and it comes from, we have to define what we mean by consumption as well, but I don't think it's strictly an Asia problem. I think that sometimes when I'm talking about sustainable fashion or secondhand fashion in Asia, I think culturally sometimes there are some obvious differences, that there might be beliefs around the energy of previous owners for garments, and that people don't want to take that on, or there's a value signaling between you can't afford to buy new clothes, so you buy secondhand. So there's that poverty social messaging that comes with it as well. I think in Cantonese the word for shoe also, I might be wrong with this, but sounds like a sai. So the idea of buying secondhand shoe or rhymes with something negative. So people will never conceive the idea of buying secondhand shoes, for example. So within the different fashion garments or fashion as such, there's a lot of resistance that might be cultural. And I think to some extent in Europe and the US that might not be so prevalent. But then people have their own hang-ups there as well. So I think there are different shades on this spectrum for everyone. But I think with sustainable fashion in Asia, at least in Hong Kong, which is my most familiar experience, we don't have that many options. So people, you kind of, as much as I love it, I do acknowledge that it's not always easy. Like if you need to have a pink dress that is above the knee in your size, it's not just going to come to you, right? You do need to plan, and I had experience with this recently. So I think there's a limitation around the availability, so the convenience. Then there's all the social conditioning around it. And then there's just the love of new stuff. There's something to be said for that. Seasonal drops, new fashion collections. I don't know how many seasons we have right now. Secondhand fashion isn't necessarily going to keep up with that. So luckily in Hong Kong we have things like the hula, which is luxury. So if you want your designer fixes, that is available. And you also have vestiaire, you can order things online. So it does cater to those markets, but very often people in those markets don't want to buy secondhand. So if you are buying Chanel, if you can afford Chanel and you're a regular buyer, you probably are not going to be looking for the last season stuff. You're probably going to be on the list to get the new stuff. So there is this dissonance, or this disconnection that is economic, social, conditioning, status. There are lots of nuances, which really gives us insights into why people do what they do. But I think the challenges in Asia, the most immediate ones I see is probably availability, because those who do buy are regular, and they're sold on it. They probably just want more options.
And now we have to give a shout out to the rather new store, Redress store in Sham Shui Po,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So there's a new address. I'm going to put that in the show notes as well, if for our Hong Kong listeners to find beautiful second-hand clothes that at the same time also then support Redress and their work. So shout out to their great work.
Absolutely.
And it is definitely big on my to-do list to stop by there, because I haven't had the chance yet to stop by. And I loved what you shared with me beforehand, actually, about the Sustainable Development Goals, where you said sustainability is a spectrum. Everything is interconnected. And that's what that's what the SDGs really showcase. Of course, all these goals, they cannot be looked at in isolation. And we brought that up also when we talked with Joe Hayes from Habitat for Humanity recently. When you're looking at the housing, for example, what would cover SDG 11, but when you're looking at, what kind of shelter does housing gives you shelter, what helps you, the people living in that house also to have a safe space. It empowers oftentimes women that would fall into categories that maybe are more quickly to fall into homelessness and so on. I listened to the episode with Joe Hayes to hear more about that topic. But for me, it's always fascinating looking at these colorful, that colorful charts of the SDGs to make people understand where they fit in with this. Where do you think you fit in with this?
Here's the funny thing. People think I love fashion. I really don't. I love what fashion can do. And I see fashion and food as kind of the gateway drugs to sustainability, because even if you're not necessarily concerned about melting ice caps or anorexic polar bears or CO2 emissions, you do understand that hopefully by now people are more aware that food waste and fashion waste are very problematic, and we all eat and we all get dressed, so we're all part of that conversation. So I think that's what's interesting to me about fashion. It is such a personal, public, private, it's everything, and it hits every point. So for me, I see it as an instrument. But the interconnectivity of everything, absolutely. I mean, we're never going to get to sustainability until people can meet their basic needs, and education. So when these things all fall into place, and this is a marathon, it's not a quick fix, but until we meet those equality needs and the inclusivity, and we acknowledge the minorities and we give space to everybody's voices, we're never really going to get there. So these things are all kind of erupting to some extent. It really feels like everything is very raw socially. People are mad, people are angry, people are vocal, people are arguing, there's a lot of stress and strife in societies around the world. And as uncomfortable as it is, and as awkward as it is, it's also a necessary breaking point, because these things have been pent up and they've been built up. So if we can kind of move through that fear and awkwardness and discomfort and kind of get engaged and bring things back to listening and bring things back to communicating and not just shouting and finger pointing and this binary, on, off, in, out, then it's going to get a lot better. But it feels like right now we need to go through this pain point. And historically, we will hopefully look back at this and see that this is giving birth to something a lot more progressive and enlightened. So yes, everything is interconnected. But this is very much how the world works, and this is very much how resources work. And if we can make those connections shorter, we might understand the value of doing certain things a little bit better, or giving space to certain things. So yeah, it's super valuable.
SDG12, responsible consumption. When I'm looking at your TEDx talk, that is amazing. I want to send everyone to it, and I'm going to link to it in the show notes. I mean, it has SDG12 printed all over it,
Sure does.
And can I just read a little bit from the intro of your TEDx talk? And I mean, you please, listeners, promise me to watch it after you listened. In this talk, Tanja Wessels will help us reimagine our connection with material world. The subtle marketing message she heard throughout her life across all industries, not just fashion, was that I am broken, and that there was something on a shelf somewhere that could fix me. So, I mean, this is not just fashion, right? Consumption in general. Absolutely, I'm so... you hear it in my voice, I get all fired up about that as well. Because you know what helped me step away from consumption in general? Going into freelance work.
Oh yes, that will help you.
Not having like a paycheck anymore. This was my... that was my wake-up call of going cold turkey, feeling like and it was also the fast fashion where I would like just buy myself a quick jumper because just to reward myself for a hard day at work in my early days. But why is it, can we get a little bit philosophical about it here now as well? Why is it that we humans feel this need or urge to consume?
There are many schools of thought on this. Just to keep it quite simple, I think that according to psychologist Marissa Peer, she believes that we're driven by two fundamental forces, the need to belong and the fear of being excluded or somehow kind of not belonging to the pack. And this is kind of very old, goes back a long time ago. To think about it this way, you know how women frequently go to the bathroom in groups? So let's step back thousands of years into this African savannah where women, if they needed to go to the loo, they would be squatting or they would be vulnerable on the floor. They couldn't see what's happening behind them. So by having this group of women around them, they could protect. And this kind of drive to belong, to not be excluded, kind of stems from that. If you were different, or if you were sick, or if you were not part of the pack, you would be excluded and you would probably not survive on your own. So we have this very archaic memory of if the pack rejects me, I'm going to die. Now, we know very well nowadays that's not the case, but we are still driven by this need to belong, for our social well-being, for our economic well-being, for our whatever it is that drives you, right? Nobody really likes to be excluded. So we will behave in certain ways to be approved. You know, if we want to be part of the fashion gang, we keep up with the latest trends or whatever floats your boat. So I think we have this very misconstrued idea that we're going to die somehow unless we do these things. And maybe in some ways it's a little death, but it's not a physical death, but it's the death of your ego, or it's the death of your sense of self. So I think we're still kind of trapped in that thinking, and everything around us encourages that, from the marketing perspectives, from the branding perspectives, from social messages. Everything feeds into that: do not be different, do not stand out, or if you are standing out, stand out with this brand that's going to help you stand out. So there are 1,000 different flavors to it, but the ultimate goal is still to hand over your money to this company, business, enterprise, etc. And there are lots of persuasive ways to do that. You know, buy now, this trend, this celebrity has it, on sale only now. You know, so the actual techniques are relatively consistent. And we go through different phases in our life. When we're young, we want to have, you know, whatever t-shirts that everybody has. When we get older, it might be a watch. It might be belonging to a social club. At the heart of it is this desire to belong to whatever we deem relevant at that point in our lives. And this is not always a bad thing. It's just when there's always a price tag attached to it, you do have to wonder if buying things made us so much happier and really brought us that joy, we would be the happiest people on earth, because for many people on this planet, not all of course, but for many people, that is very much available. Shopping 24/7, having things delivered from every corner of the world, from Peru to Paraguay to Paris. So we should be really happy, right? But yet, it's not really how it's panning out. So what is it that what's really driving this?
Did you notice your feelings or your moods change then when you stopped consuming?
Yeah, I had so much more energy to not be in that media maze of cycles of seasons. Like if you step out of it and you couldn't care less if this season's color is coral because Pantone said so and every collection is revolving around that concept. If you step out of that and you just say, I'm not going to play this game anymore, guess what? You don't drop dead. You still have friends. You probably have a lot more time on your hands, and you just have this sense of liberation, because it's like, I'm not going to play that game anymore. And then you start embarking on a whole different kind of experience. But for me, it's been extremely rewarding, because these systems are designed, honestly, with one goal in mind, and that is to exchange cash. Nothing wrong with that. But at what point do we step away and we say, actually, there's probably a lot of better things to be doing with my time and energy than to make very wealthy CEOs become wealthier. And kind of everybody else along that pecking line just suffers and bears it, be it planet, people, animals. It's kind of really messed up.
Not playing that game anymore. I love how Tanja puts that. Before we continue to hear Tanja's advice on what you can do today to take your first step into a sustainable lifestyle, I want to bring up the Redress Design Award. It is the world's largest sustainable fashion design competition. Organized by Redress. Yeah, that's the Redress, who was founded by the Christina Dean, who inspired Tanja so much on her own journey into a circular fashion lifestyle. And Tanja actually sat right there in the audience at the spectacular center stage in the heart of Hong Kong for this year's Redress Design Award show. The Redress Design Award works to educate emerging fashion designers around the world about sustainable design theories and techniques in order to drive growth towards a circular fashion system. I had the chance to speak with this year's Hong Kong Best Prize winner, Sai Lau. What stood out about Sai's sustainable designs, to me in particular, is that they were inspired by her own personal journey and mental health struggle with ADHD, Attention Deficit and Hyperactivity Disorder. Sai is 20 years young. This was one of her first ever podcast interviews she gave. And after we recorded, she asked me why I invited her to come on the show. Well, after you hear what she shares, you will understand why.
Fashion came from the ADHD, as I think even I have ADHD, I should be more hardworking in design, because people in who have mental health or physical disabled, people will always think that fashion designers is always all-around persons and who has a lot of ability. But I think that if you are more hardworking, you can succeed it too. Yeah, even you have some imperfect things. I really want to thank all the people who makes me to the finalists and giving me a lot of advice on sustainable fashion. And as it is the second time for me to participate the Redress Design Award, which is really touching for me. And I think it's really meaningful to design in sustainable way, as it will help people and help the world. Yeah. And I think the more is we need to change the people's mindsets that they should be sustainable and they should not buy those fast fashion, as it will cause a lot of waste. Because I used to be a fast fashion people that buy lots of clothes every week, and I just wear the clothes twice a week, which is very, it causes a lot of waste. Yeah.
I can imagine maybe your friends or your peers, people in your age, there are probably a lot of people around you that are still very focused on fast fashion and buying new clothes every single week, just like you described, like you did in the past. How are you talking to your friends then about that, to try and convince them that they shouldn't buy so many clothes? Or when it comes to your family, for example, how do you talk to your friends and your family about your passion for sustainable fashion? How do you convince them that they should also start to care?
The first thing is trying to buy some sustainable fashion as a gift to give them, and told them to buy some sustainable fashion rather than the fast fashion, as it will cause a lot of waste, and convince them by action, I think.
Yeah. It takes so much courage to show up in the way Sai did, with her story, with her talent, with her imperfections. Connect with Sai on Instagram at sai.lau.official. That is spelled psy.lau.official. And as we continue to hear Tanja's story, I also wanted to know from her what feelings it triggered as she started to expose herself more to the fashion industry's enormous waste challenge.
I think I felt disappointed that I kind of didn't see it sooner. And I felt angry and sad and depressed about the state of everything when I understood, like in 2015, when I started seeing the headlines and just understanding that something bigger was going on and that people weren't taking care of it. And then I would go to the supermarket and I would just see coconuts covered in plastic and just things that do not need plastic. Everything was just wrapped in it. It's like we didn't even care anymore. Like we'd just given up. Like it does not matter. And I don't have children, but I remember thinking that I do not want my nephews and my niece to walk into a supermarket and see a coconut covered in a polyester fruit foam sock and think that that's normal, because it's not. And what are we saying? And that really bothered me. Like, how do we ever communicate the value of things if this is just normal, this is legal, this is around you every day? It really kind of freaked me out. And the moment, and I'd seen it for a while, but one day I was in the supermarket and I saw this coconut and I lost it. My mind was racing. It was going 1,000 years forward. I was seeing devastation and wildlife dropping dead and heat, but my legs wouldn't move, and I just kind of understood that something really weird was going on. And I went home and I Googled it, and I understood that there's a thing called eco-anxiety, which is a extreme concern about ecological collapse. And I understood that was what was happening to me. Today, thankfully, it's a lot more commonly discussed. And it's called a few different things. It's not just eco-anxiety, climate, I don't know, there are a few different ways to describe it, but at the heart of it is this overwhelming fear of environmental doom. And so it was also about fashion, but it was just a general thing. Christina opened my eyes to the possibility of using fashion to communicate that. But I think it's just irresponsible consumption all around.
I found something beautiful you wrote in your blog. I was really digging out everything. I could really get lost in the things you have created and put out there. Really, it was such a joy to actually look up
oh my God.
all this life you lived in the last few years. And I wanted to bring this one up. So once you started saying no to the fashion consumption, at least there was this maybe revelation that you had. And I'm reading this now from a blog post you wrote around a year ago, where you shared about how going into secondhand fashion reignited your fashion mojo. Loving the title, by the way. And you said, I completely tapped out of trends, seasons, must-have items. My new style was dictated by what fit me in the local charity shop. It felt like the clothing now picked me instead of the other way around. Does it still inspire you that the clothes pick you? Do you never miss just going and buying something new, like that pink dress that you were looking for?
I don't miss that at all. There was this incident for the TEDx talk where I needed to have a very certain garment and I couldn't find it in the right time frame, and that then I really understood, ironically enough, giving a talk about material waste, how hard it can be, because you're quite limited in terms of camera and lighting and colors. And I just didn't have what they were asking for, so there was a panic moment there, and I understood how friggin' hard it is to do that. But that was one time in 4 years, and to be quite honest, no, I don't miss it at all. And the tighter, the less options you have, the more interesting things get. And I think we see this in life. When people say, oh, I've got so many choices, they kind of get analysis paralysis because they're just kind of overwhelmed. But when you have a few choices, you're like, I'm going to make that work. And somehow that has been the case. So I've let go of my ego. I sometimes leave the house dressed like a clown because, I don't know, I kind of don't really care about that so much anymore. And the funny thing is, I've never talked about my clothes as much as I do now, and I just see it as a really nice gateway to talk about sustainability, because within 2 minutes somebody asks you, I love your dress, where did you get it? And then you go on, it's secondhand, and then the conversation becomes about a lot more interesting things than the dress. So to me, it's just, I feel like a human billboard for sustainable conversations, because nothing is about the actual garments after 5 minutes, and that's way more interesting, because unless you're designing the clothes or you're creating something, what's the value in really boasting about paying a lot of money for something that you didn't even make? So I've always found that kind of branding and fashion and high, super expensive clothing a little bit silly. I understand the craftsmanship and I respect that, and I love beautiful things. But let's face it, a lot of the fashion prices that are ostentatious today are not that price because they're beautifully made. They're that price because somebody has artificially hyped that up. And it's a bit ridiculous because we're all being taken for a ride and we're paying for it. And that to me is a bit sad.
For anyone out there listening right now that has maybe only now discovered about the impact that they are having with the choices they make when it comes to fashion, is there something that you would want them to know, to take a first step into consuming more responsibly?
I think the overarching thought in sustainable fashion, at least, is just that there's too much. There's too much consumption. And even if you're making sustainable clothing, the volumes that people are producing are not sustainable. So you can recycle all the textiles you want, and you can do all that stuff, but you're still consuming resources. So that's the problem with a lot of fast fashion brands who talk about being sustainable. Very few, if any, are willing to talk about the volumes, because there's an economic model that they operate off. And so I think for anybody who wants to get started, the overarching theme is just less. So, some people choose to only support sustainable brands and go for local brands as smaller brands. Great. I mean, I have no value judgment around these things. People need to do what works for them. I just don't have the bandwidth or the interest to keep up with all the changing labels, regulations, shifts in companies. Like one day a company is green, the next day they're bought by somebody who isn't, and that changes the economic model, or there's greenwashing. There are a number of variables, and my personal stance is just secondhand, and even that's problematic. It's not the answer to everything. Secondhand within itself sometimes gives people this license to just shop recklessly because they're going to give it to charity. That's not the answer either. So any way you look at it, less is always the better way ahead. So if you're just starting, support local brands, support people who have good ethical practices, and just buy fewer garments. Look after them better, wash them better. People don't always think about that, but don't wash them at high temperatures. Don't use drying machines. Just a few steps, get rid of stains, upcycle, mend things. There's a lot of ways to go around it, but you need to overcome that itch to have new at large quantities. That's kind of, I think, one of the biggest hurdles, because we've been so conditioned to respond to that.
I could talk for hours with you, and there are actually so many more topics I wanted to touch upon, but I knew that this was going to happen, and that we cannot talk about everything. So everyone listening right now, actually, I want to encourage to follow your journey, just to get in touch with you, and we're going to get to that, how they can do that. But before, you have to go through the quick fire round with me. Okay. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
Making an impact means
being your true self.
Who inspires you in the way they are tackling the sustainable development goals?
I would say, and I know this sounds a little bit trite, and this is a quick fire round, but every single person who actually steps up to the challenge, and they can be big names, small names, doesn't really matter. This is not about the social approval. This is just about not being an asshole to the planet.
What could everyone do right now to make the world a better place?
Slow down with your thoughts, with your need to keep up, with your need to buy, consume. Just slow down and look a little bit inward.
I think that's something that we could all do right now. Yeah, so actionable. Thank you so much for this, Tanja, for doing this with me after all this time, being such how should I say it, such a cheerleader for the podcast as well. Thank you for always encouraging me to keep going. I really appreciate it, and also for sharing your feedback as well. I have to put this on the record that thanks to you and your recommendation, we have one of the most inspiring change makers, Jill Robinson, who is the founder of Animals Asia Foundation, on the podcast, and this was thanks to you actually recommending her to me in the first place. So thank you for that. And now that we heard your story, I want people to find out even more about you. Where do you want people to reach out and connect with you?
So there will be a new website coming up. I'm building a new business with a partner called Revive Consulting, and we will be launching our website soon. In the meantime, I'm on Instagram as Tanjarina, Tanjarina, or also All In by Tanja. So that's more sustainably focused.
Fantastic. And I will put all these links in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for today, Tanja.
And thank you for being so expansive with your offerings and doing so much for the podcast and sound world, and making yourself available, and the workshops and the lessons. I'm actually going to take your podcast lessons soon. So, hey, right back at you.
Oh, I would love a the Tanja podcast coming to you soon. And you will, of course, hear all about this here as well, too. So, we keep checking in with our guests as well to see what they are up to. And I'm very excited to hear more about this Revive Consulting as well. So we'll look out for that one. Thank you.
I promised that this episode was special. There is one more reason that I wanted to surprise you with. We love when we hear from our listeners. This is Devansh, based in Hong Kong, who is also taking action when it comes to SDG12, responsible consumption. He tackles food waste. Hear for yourself how he does that.
Hello everyone, my name is Devansh and I'm currently tuning in from my university campus in Hong Kong, where I've been living for the past 3 years now. You'll actually find it rather interesting that I was up till 2 a.m. last night crumbing bread into small pieces. Now you'd wonder why. This is actually a very interesting story which dates back to about 1.5 years now, where my friends Suyash, Anushka, Naman and myself encountered the scale at which bread is wasted from the bakeries in Hong Kong. And we thought that this seemed like something which had to be fixed or addressed. And after doing very basic research, we figured out that all the surplus bread could actually be used to make beer. Now, to the ears of a bunch of 19-year-olds, that seemed like the recipe for a magical opportunity, which is why we took it up and we put the little resources that we had into testing a pilot batch. And after the proof of concept was done, the beginning of Breer happened. A journey that has proved to be an amazing opportunity in self-growth and making a tangible impact in the world, where we have been able to define Breer as a food upcycling startup that uses the surplus unsold, uneaten bread from the bakeries around Hong Kong to make locally brewed craft beer. Now, this concept hits the 3P principle right in the nail by leveraging the local communities, hence the people, to make positive change in the planet, all while being for profit. And we obviously align ourselves with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly number 12, by promoting responsible production and consumption, by leveraging all the food waste that is currently available and using that to promote sustainable products and lifestyle choices. Hence, Breer is planet-saving beer, where we aim to save the world one beer at a time. Look out for us.
Yes, definitely look out for them. We really do have the most amazing listeners and community. Find more information and links to all our featured voices and links that were mentioned in the show notes. And if you enjoy what we do here, please support our work and join us at #impact.com/club. It would be amazing to see you there at our next virtual coffee break. Thank you so much for today. Thank you so much for listening now all the way to the end. You are such a star. Talk to you soon. Bye.